Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, back with another episode. Today I will be tackling Eduard's recent release of the A6M Zero. Now, I will apologize in advance. This video is a little bit longer than my normal video is, and I just want to explain a little bit why. So when I'm making these models, specifically for YouTube, I usually end up filming about 10 hours worth of footage. And one of the challenges with editing these videos is condensing 10 hours worth of footage down into roughly 30 minutes for a YouTube video. And it's always difficult trying to decide what stays and what goes in the video, what's important to show you and what might be less important to show you. And with this kit in particular, there was just so much detail packed into such a tiny package that I felt it was a little bit more necessary this time to kind of show you much more step-by-step how this kit goes together, because it is really fantastic. And I feel like half the part count of this kit went into the cockpit itself. There was so much detail going into this, and both in plastic and in photo etch, and it was just a shame to not show as much as I could to you. So I apologize. This video is going to be a little bit longer than normal. You're going to be seeing a little bit more of each step than I normally show, but really it's just because I want to highlight how great this kit is, and what a pleasure it was to be able to build this kit. It really was very, very nice. So so far, if you've been watching and not necessarily paying attention to my rambling here, there's a lot of little parts going into the cockpit here, and on its own, without the photo etch, the cockpit would be a standout. It was just, there's so much detail in the plastic, so many tiny little pieces, and it all fits together very nicely and snugly. The photo etch really does add that next level to it. You'll see here this lever that I'm currently cutting off the plastic part and cleaning up to then replace it with a photo etch part. And while the plastic part was fine, and in reality, you really wouldn't see much of it looking into the cockpit, just adding this little bit of photo etch really just kind of elevates the quality and the detail. And that's kind of the running theme in this throughout this kit. It's just, there's so much amazing detail packed into this. And really the Zero is not a very large airplane. Even for a radial engine airplane, it's not very big. And so the fact that Eduard was able to get so much detail packed into this was quite amazing. I will take a moment to refrain from the praises, just to say that there, with so much detail and so many parts going into the cockpit, there were a few times where I found the instructions to be a little unclear as to what went where, especially on the cockpit sidewalls. Dry fitting and testing will pay dividends here before gluing, just to make sure you're getting everything in its proper place, just because the instructions were sometimes just so cluttered with so many little parts going in that it was kind of confusing at times. But I was able to figure it out, and it's all worth it in the end. I mean, you can just see the way that the C is attached, and I didn't drill any holes for that. Like that's how the plastic came, and very impressive, and just hands down one of the most pleasant experiences I've had building a model kit and honestly that's like among a lot of other pleasant kits to build. So right off the bat, I'm going to say I highly recommend this kit to anyone that is interested in World War II aircraft, especially if you have an affinity for the Japanese aircraft, but just want a good experience altogether. This kit is just top notch. So at this point, I'm actually removing the molded on detail from these side consoles. And like I mentioned before, the plastic itself is good and alone would turn out a very nice cockpit. But I decided to remove those parts in favor of the photo etch. And I know that there are some, and this includes myself, some people that sometimes feel like photo etch doesn't always give the best results, mainly just because photo etch is very two-dimensional. It can be very flat. Whereas you notice the detail that I was scraping off the plastic was quite three-dimensional. And normally I'm a big fan of putting decals over like that type of three-dimensional detail. But I opted for the photo etch just because the photo etch in this case did have a lot of detail in it, and multiple layers of photo etch went into this. So in the end, I was quite pleased with it. So getting into the painting part, I decided to base coat everything with an aluminum color. I wanted to show some chipping and wear inside the cockpit, but also to help try and replicate that metallic blue-green color that was used on Zeros. And I know that there's specific paints out there designed for that, but I wanted to kind of experiment. So I ended up mixing some Tamiya Clear Blue and Tamiya Clear Green until I was happy with the consistent, and then spraying it over the metallic, the aluminum color. And ultimately this kind of gave me a color that I was satisfied with. I might try experimenting more in the future, but it worked, because really the only place you see this color on the Pearl Harbor aircraft was after the cockpit. And I know there's kind of there's quite a lively discussion online about were the wheel whales painted this color or were they painted the body color. And there was good arguments on both sides. Ultimately, I decided to go with body color for the wheel wells. That was kind of like the majority consensus that I found, and honestly, it was easier to paint. I also know that technically they didn't use like the same interior green color that we would use on U.S. aircraft, but this was pretty close, and ultimately the cockpit's pretty small, and even with the canopy opened, it's still pretty tight in there and difficult to see. So this was going to work for me. So I had applied some of that liquid mask you've seen me do on other videos in random places in the cockpit, that I can then later scrape off and reveal the metallic paint underneath, and that will help me do the chipping. And this has really become one of my more favorite methods for chipping. Once everything is base coated, we give it a gloss coat so that we can do weathering and decals and such. So that's what we're doing here. Everything gets a good gloss coat. And one of the other fascinating things about this kit and this cockpit is just how just the way that it's engineered. There's a lot of parts that all have to align together. You've got the cockpit floor, that back bulkhead that the seat appears on, and then you have the sidewalls, not just the actual side of the fuselage, but there's sidewall panels that fit in around the tub. Then you have the front bulkhead, which has the machine guns attached to it, and then you have the instrument panel, and all these components and all these parts come together, and you'd think that, man, this would be really difficult to get everything aligned, but it really just kind of fits together and snaps together, and it's quite impressive. I mean, we're talking Tamiya level engineering here, in terms of the cockpit and the fit and how it all goes together. And the great thing is it all makes sense. They're all logical subassemblies, and they work. So I've gone ahead and given it a wash. Now I'm just kind of removing the excess. This will just help kind of make some of those details pop, create some kind of deep shadows in the recesses, and really just add some depth to the cockpit. Like I said, I did a little bit of chipping. I wasn't going to go super heavy on the weathering. From the research that I did, it looks like the aircraft that participated in the Pearl Harbor attack were all very well-maintained aircraft, very clean, and so they're just, I didn't see the need to do heavy weathering. So At this point, we're just kind of hand painting a lot of the cockpit details, just various, panels and electrical boxes and things on the side cockpit walls, and all rather straightforward. There wasn't anything particularly difficult about the painting, and the instructions do a good job of calling out everything that needs to be painted, what colors they need to be painted, and so forth. So there was very little mystery of what needed to be done or how it needed to be done. Just a matter of getting it done. And there are a lot of components in here that do need to be painted. For such a small aircraft and for how, light they were supposed to be, that actually had a lot of equipment inside the cockpit. Now we can prepare to apply the colored photo etch. The other reason I chose the interior green that I did is because it more closely matched the green that was already on the pre-painted photo etch. And I wanted to get those as close as possible, so that's another reason why I chose that. But here you can see how Eduard layers up their photo etch. So you have this initial piece going on, and you can see there's a couple of instrument faces on it, and then you have another part that goes over that, and that helps create that layering and that depth with the photo etch. And they really do look very nice, and I feel like Eduard's colored photo etch have been improving. I remember some of the very first ones I used felt really grainy, like they had a lot of grain in the color. But this one was very smooth and very clean, and I was very impressed. So here are just various levers going in. And this is all photo etch, and once viewed from with the cockpit closed up, it all looks great. So now we do the main instrument panel. And again, this is going to show you how the layering works. There's so many little components that go into building up the instrument panel, and it was just it was enjoyable. I really enjoyed doing this, and I think the end result was very much worth it. So lots of little parts going on, and you got to be careful when you're cutting all these little photo etch parts so they don't go flying off into the carpet monster. Never to be seen again. But it's quite worth the time, and I don't think it really took me that long to get this all done, but I was really pleased with it. I think it looks great. I did go back. The Eduard photo etch actually does come with like little drops of clear over the instrument panels. I did go back over and add a little bit more clear over those instrument faces just to kind of make them shine a little bit more. So here you can see you're just adding in the belts on the seat. The Zero had an interesting way that they did the shoulder harnesses, that not kind of like the tradition like you'd see on Western aircraft. So I found that a little odd, but because I kind of have this one strap over the back of the seat and then another strap kind of like on the side of it. It's interesting. I didn't really find any good reference pictures of it, so I just followed what the instructions told me to do, and ultimately that's what we get. But it looks good. I like it. It turned out well. So at this point, everything is in, and we can matte coat everything. This will just help tie in all of the photo etch and all of the stuff that's been painted to really give it an even finish throughout. I did try to avoid the metallic areas as best as possible. But so here you can see how everything is going to fit together. You have the cockpit tub and the sidewalls just lock into place, and really didn't have any issues at all. And you can, this gives you a good idea of just how tight this little cockpit is, and how close everything is. I imagine those pilots were quite cramped in there, but very busy. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. So we add the instrument panel, and it kind of sandwiches between the two side parts there, and then we can eventually add the front bulkhead, and we get these cylinders that go into the back. And honestly, these things, you really don't end up seeing them once the kit's done, but it's kind of cool to know that they're there. And I guess if you really wanted to, you could shine a light from a very specific angle and see them. But so here's that front bulkhead going on with the machine guns. And now we can actually start concentrating on building up the fuselage. Another unique thing about this Eduard kit is you don't actually build the cockpit into the fuselage. You can assemble the fuselage separate, and then the cockpit just locks in from the bottom. And again, I was a little nervous with how many parts were involved with that cockpit that it wouldn't fit in there correctly, but it honestly just drops in and fits snug. I mean, I can't really complain about it. It fit really well. So here we're just getting that glued in. Plus that cockpit then helps really, properly set the width on the wing root areas. And now we can just start adding in various panels. Again, just the fit and engineering on these panels was superb. These panels go underneath where the guns are. I imagine with different version that they plan on releasing of the Zero, they'll have different panels that fit in there. So it's good that it can be modular. Quite a few components go into making up the landing gear wheel wells. So you have kind of that main spar section on the back half, and then you get multiple parts going around to close up the wheel well. And a lot of nice detail. There's this detail on the underside of the upper wings to finish out that landing gear wheel well. So now we can get the wings glued together, and again, fit here was phenomenal. It all worked together really well. Minimal cleanup on these, and same thing with the horizontal stabilizers. These are multi-part things, so you have to do top and bottom half of the stabilizer plus the elevators. But the nice thing about that, it does allow you to position all the control surfaces are positionable. So that is nice. There was minimal scene cleanup. The fit was quite excellent. So here I'm just kind of getting the rough shape with a metal file here, a micro file, and then we move in with the sanding stick and clean that up. Again, very easy, very minimal. Didn't have to spend too much time worrying about cleaning up these lines. And for the most part, Eduard does a good job of putting, where the wings meet up with the fuselage, and the join lines are in logical places where there would be panel lines. So cleanup is really a minimum. This is another interesting part. The engine cowling is made up of 6 parts, I believe, and you assemble it all in this little jig. So the jig is supplied in the kit. You build it all around the jig, glue it all together, and then you can remove the jig, and you have your completed engine cowling. And I'm glad they did it that way. The fit was perfect. There was no issues, and it maximizes the amount of detail you can get on that engine cowling. So it shows all the rivets, all the fasteners, all the access panels. It was beautiful. The engine, also another nice little well-detailed engine. It's unfortunate that a lot of it is hidden inside the tight cowling and the large spinner hub. You really don't see much. But you could easily detail that up really well. Although the kit does come with photo etch for the engine to represent the ignition wires and such. So, you really get a lot out of the box in this kit. Everything really just kind of snaps together and fits perfectly throughout the kit. Very few issues here. This is just the pilot's headrest going on to kind of complete the cockpit. You can see I painted the back, I believe they call it the turtle deck, the back part of that black, along with the combing over the instrument panel. And here we're modifying the kit gun sight. And unlike other previous Eduard releases where there's usually a big seam line running right down the middle of the gun sight glass, this one was actually pretty clean. It wouldn't have looked terrible out of the box, but it's such an easy fix to replace the gun sight glass that I pretty much always do it at every kit now. Even in 72nd scale, it's pretty simple to do. We'll hit the turtle deck with just a little bit of a dry brush to kind of pop some of the rivets and details on there, show a little bit of wear, and same thing on the combing here before we install the gun sight. There is this little antenna piece here that goes on the back part here. They do offer a photo etch version of it as well, but honestly, I think the plastic version just looks just as good as the photo etch would, so I just use the plastic part. Here we install the gun sight, and it fits well. It has a nice positive locating point, so goes in pretty well. And so we just got to get these few details done before we can start adding the canopy glass and close up the cockpit in preparation to paint the aircraft. Final step here is to apply the gun sight glass. So just a tiny amount of super glue, and it just fits right on. And again, I think this just looks better in scale, and it really is not a difficult upgrade. There is a backup iron sight here that gets added on, so it's kind of cool to see both the iron sight and the gun sight together like that. I thought that was quite neat, and looked really good. Clear parts go on. These fit perfectly, and very, very detailed. You can see there's that rivet detail on the canopy frames, and yeah, I really can't complain much here. These fit well and look the part. And thankfully, Eduard supplies canopy masks, because there's a lot of framing here. Now, you'll notice a piece of blue tape on the inside. So on the back part, there is an open part of the canopy, and I was afraid that I would get overspray into the back deck there. And so I kind of banked on a gamble here, and put that piece of tape in there, hoping that I'd be able to pull it out at the end of the build so that I could avoid getting that overspray in there. So thankfully it worked, and I was able to avoid the overspray. So I'm curious if other people have built this kit, what they did for that, and how they dealt with that, because that seems like a difficult thing to deal with. But anyway, so here we're just putting on the die cut canopy masks, and again, these are a lifesaver because the Zero has a lot of framing and a lot of glass, so these fit perfectly. No complaints. They're sized exactly, which is what you would expect from Eduard and one of their own kits. So just a matter of getting all the pieces on. And now what I'm going to do, so Eduard provides multiple canopies, and they provide a canopy that's meant to be in a closed position and a canopy meant to be in an open position. And I wanted to do the open position, so I used the closed position canopy to mask off the cockpit. And right now I'm just applying, white PVA glue. And so this will temporarily put the canopy in place, but it makes it easy to remove and requires almost no cleanup. So kind of a great solution instead of using tape or something to mask off. So everything was primed in black, and now we can start adding on the body color. I did do a little bit of pre-coloring on this with some light grays and some browns. Like I mentioned before, I wasn't going to go super heavy on the weathering, but I did wanted to add just a little bit of color modulation to an otherwise monotone aircraft. And so you'll see more so on the actual fuselage of the aircraft, a lot of this grays and browns that were mixed in there that will just kind of help add just a little hint of modulation underneath this gray color. This is a Vallejo color, and it sprayed beautifully, gave a nice good finish. I was quite happy with it. I've lately been moving over to the Ammo by MIG paints more often, but Vallejo, I think, had a great match here, and quite happy with it. Although I'm sure there will be people that will tell me it's the wrong color, and that's fine. This is what looked right to my eye, and But here, yeah, here you can see that gray and brown modulation and how it shows through the base coat. You do it to maximize your that modulation showing through your base coat. You do need to thin your paints a little bit just so that they're not going on full strength, full body, and allow some of that other color to show through. Also, it just helps with your airbrush control, just making sure that you're not spraying it as heavy as you should or as you need to be. But I understand there's multiple different techniques and processes for painting, and this might not be to everyone's taste, but I think it worked well on this. So now we can paint the propeller and spinner. This is just getting a coat of aluminum here, and the Japanese had an interesting, I don't know if it's a way of manufacturing their propeller blades or if it was just part of painting their propeller blades, but they often had a lot of like browns mixed in with their propeller blades. So this is all based off of the instructions from Eduard and what they call out, but they had this unique pattern on the back side of the propeller blades with this kind of reddish brown color. So it's kind of cool, very, very unique. I'm curious if that was as like a anti-glare thing for the pilot because it's the side facing the pilot, but I don't know. The cowl is black, but I decided to highlight it with some dark blue-gray just to add a little bit of color into there and not make it just like a solid black color. It's very subtle and it's hard to see in the video, but it really shows up well in person. So with all the main painting done, the base coating done, we can gloss coat everything in preparation for decals and weathering. A note on decals. So being a new Eduard release, it uses Eduard's newer, I guess they've been out for a couple of years now, but they're in-house decals. And I know there's a lot of videos, there's a lot of articles out there talking about Eduard's new decals. And I've personally really grown to dislike them. I think it's a big downgrade from when they were using cartograph decals. Those are just far superior. I do not like the whole carrier film thing that they got going on, where you're supposed to be able to, well, I guess technically you're not supposed to be able to remove them, but many people do. And I've tried and experimented on removing them, and I can't seem to get it right. So for this one, I did not remove the carrier film. And under a couple of coats of Solvaset, for the most part, they conformed and they look good. They could look better, if that makes sense. And especially where you have a lot of these big solid colors like the red roundels, the blue stripe on the fuselage, the stripes on the tail. They would really benefit from better decals. Now, probably what I should have done is actually just mask those areas off and painted them. That would have been much better, but chose not to do that on this kit. And I really wanted to build this out of the box. So there we go. I don't love their decals, and for the other kit in this dual combo set, I think I might go with aftermarket decals. Or at the very least, spray the national markings and things like that. But we'll see. So a couple coats of Solvaset and another coat of gloss over the decals to seal them in and to protect them from the weathering stage. And we're ready to move on. Fortunately, there weren't a lot of decals on the Zero, so it didn't really take that long. Not as much stenciling as one might expect. So now we're going with a wash, and I'm using this one that's called Interior Wash. It's kind of like a brownish gray color and not quite as strong as the one that I normally use, the brown color for green vehicles. So again, it's because I didn't really want to heavily weather this aircraft. I wanted to add some a little bit of contrast from the panels and the rivets because there's so many rivets on this airplane and it looks amazing. and the rivet detail is just exquisite and subtle and nice. So I wanted to have some contrast in there, just not super strong contrast. So that's why I chose this color. So it's really just a matter of applying it all over the vehicle, and you can see I'm not being careful with it. I'm just kind of slapping it on and kind of getting it all over. Once it dries, then it just wipes off. So I kind of do one half of the aircraft, let it dry, wipe it off, then do the other half. So that way, while I'm handling it, I'm not, leaving fingerprints everywhere and gunking it up. But you can see it just wipes off, and there's kind of a little bit of a tide mark on that back part of the wing there. So when you do have stubborn spots like that, just a tiny amount of thinner, enamel thinner. You don't want too much because then you'll start melting all your clear coats and paint. But just a little bit will get in there and get that removed. So now we can start applying some of the details to the kit and move on to the next stages of weathering. Again, just the engineering of this kit is phenomenal. Everything fits so well together and so precisely and tight. There were quite a few times when I felt like you could almost just snap this kit together. Like, that's how well and tight it was engineered. I decided to mix a little bit of gloss into the flat coat here and kind of go for more of a satin look to the overall finish. Again, I did this. I chose that because I wasn't going to go too heavy on the weathering, so I wanted there to be a little bit of a sheen to it. From reference pictures that I saw, the Zeros, at least the ones that were in good condition, seemed to have a nice sheen to them. So that's kind of what I was trying to replicate. There still will be a little slight bit of a sheen to it, but landing gear going together well. And in spite of how spindly they are, they actually felt quite solid. A lot of good connection points and solid connection points between the landing gear and the aircraft. So next up, we're going to do some weathering with oils. Like I mentioned in the Hellcat video a couple weeks ago, really, really loving oils for weathering, for exhaust, for gun stains, things like that. And this was no exception on this kit. Again, I wasn't going to go super heavy. From what I could tell, these aircraft were really well maintained, at least at the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor. But I was kind of going more for the idea of this airplane had actually just returned from the attack, and so it would have, it would be just slightly dirtier because it had just been, it had just flown its mission. So that's kind of what I was going for here. Do a little staining on the gun ports, or the shell ejection ports for the guns here, the exhaust staining, and again, so really what I'm doing here is just applying small amounts of the oil paint, and really just kind of applying it in a dry brush type fashion, I guess you could say, to help kind of with blending it and making it all look nice and smooth, and was quite happy with the results. So just when you're doing this, if you do have the drop tank on, just remember the drop tank was right in between both of those exhaust ports, so there would be some exhaust kicking back there, so don't forget to apply some weathering there. It's always a fun time when you can remove the canopy masking and it all turns out great. Huge props to the Eduard masks here. So here you'll get to see if my experiment paid off. It was kind of tricky getting in there and trying to get it loose enough to pull out, but there we go. It worked, and no overspray inside. So I'm happy that gamble paid off. So basically at this point, it's just a final assembly here, getting everything put together. Like I mentioned, good solid attachment points for the landing gear. It was not difficult getting them aligned and looking correct. Landing gear doors going on. These fit well. And this kit was just such a pleasure to build. And I'm definitely looking forward to building more of them in the future. Like I mentioned before, I have another kit from the dual combo set here that I will build, and I do want to get to some of the later models that they've just released in the green color. I think those would be quite fascinating to paint and weather up. So definitely look for more of these kits or more videos of these in the future. And this was a pleasure, hands down. So just a few little details going into the canopy here before we get it installed on the fuselage. And the fit here was just phenomenal, and it looks great. The the final piece to really put on here is this radio mast. I had contemplated putting it on prior to painting, but I figured it'd just be easier to apply it now and just hand paint it rather than doing all the clever masking. So here's the final review. And we have it on a carrier deck base that I built out of balsa wood and photo etch tie downs. And we have a little resin pilot on there to represent the pilot after he just returned from his mission. Great kit, highly recommended. Absolutely joy to build. If you've made it this far, sorry this video is longer than normal. I really appreciate you sticking around. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing and like the video. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know what I got wrong. I'm definitely not a Zero expert, so I'm sure you'll be able to point out my inaccuracies. But I look forward to the next time we can chat and I can show you the next video. So take care, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.